My name is Reuben Ebrahimoff. I'm also known as a Haftorah man. Why? Because I usually speak about the Haftorot. But what occurred to me, and what I'll be speaking about today, is the history and the biblical origins of the Jewish holidays. And I put together a handout for everybody to look at as I'm speaking, and I wanted everybody to start on the last page. We're going at it Hebrew style, which would be the first page. I don't know, growing up, if the information about the holidays were presented to me in this way that I'd have the same relationship with them. So let me show you what this is. It's a map of the Middle East, and underneath it is a timeline. The timeline shows where we were when a specific holiday got started. The map shows us where we were when the holiday got started. The timeline shows us when the holiday got started. So, all the holidays that we have on a Jewish calendar are on this single page. Every single holiday on the Chag, it's here. So I'm going to run you through it. After the 6 days of creation, we're told about Shabbat, and nothing happens for a couple of thousand years. We go into the land of Egypt, and while we're in the land of Egypt, we stay there, according to some opinions, 210 years, some 400 years. Whatever the story may be, Egypt was the world superpower at the time. At the Exodus, we went to Mount Sinai. So that Exodus was the first time that Passover was celebrated while we were in Egypt. So if you put it as the first holiday on the timeline, it's towards the left part of the timeline. On this side over here, where it says Egypt. That's where we were as a nation when the first holiday of Passover happened. We go into the Sinai Desert. And while in the Sinai Desert, we're given the Torah. And the giving of the Torah also shows us that we have to keep Shabbat, we have to keep Rosh Chodesh, the new months, and it also tells us about, doesn't say Rosh Hashanah, but we know that today we observe Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and also Shavuot and Sukkot, because of the time that we spent leaving Egypt and in the Sinai Desert. We move into Israel. We're there for 440 years before King Solomon builds the Beit HaMikdash. And then after 410 years, the Beit HaMikdash comes down. By whom? Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And there are 4 days in the calendar that are attributed to this man's existence. 4 fast days, not holidays. Next, the Babylonian Empire is part of the 70 years that we spent in exile. So for 52 years, we're in the Babylonian exile, and they're the rulers of the world, until Koresh, Cyrus, king of Persia, takes over Babylonia, and now he writes what's the first Bill of Rights of human beings. It's called the Cyrus Cylinder. It was just in the Metropolitan Museum. And it says, all men and women are free to worship whatever deity, whatever God they want. And it makes specific mention that the Jewish people should return to Yerushalayim and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. As a matter of fact, Cyrus, Koresh, in the book of Yeshayahu, is referred to as Mashiach Hashem, Mashiach Yud Kei Vav Kei. Why? In those days, Mashiach had a different meaning. It meant the savior of the Jews. It doesn't have this same meaning that it has today. Then, after the Persian Empire lasted about 50 years, you come into Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. So, to look at the timeline, you'll see, while we're in Egypt, we got Pesach, then Shavuot and Sukkot. When we're in the land of Israel, we had the Shalosh Regalim, which I'll go into. Then, because of Nebuchadnezzar, as we move along the timeline, we have the 4 fast days, and we're in Babylonia, to the right side of the map. the Persians take over, and the Purim story, so that part of our lives are on this timeline. And then finally, what we're celebrating right now, Hanukkah, the holiday when the Greek Empire ruled over us. So there, on the quick, you have an explanation geographically of where were we when these holidays first started, and then you also have, chronologically speaking, when did the holidays get started, that you could see the order of them. Now, let's look at the front of the book, and we're going to look at the history, the biblical origins of the Jewish holidays. And I put together this idea that we should have a calendar, and that a calendar will inform us of all the holidays and their origins. So if you flip open to the first page, you'll see on the left-hand side, Tishrei, and then on the right-hand side, it explains to you Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and it's on Tishrei, the first and the second days, and you're looking at me saying, you made me come to a class to tell me something I already knew? Come on. I'll tell you what happens. Originally, in the Torah, what does it say as far as the New Year goes? It says, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. What month? Chodesh HaRishon. The months didn't even have names in those days. The names come from Babylonia, when we're in the Babylonian exile. I'll get to that in a minute. But let's come back. The New Year originally was in Nisan. It was in the first of the month. That was the New Year. So you go, hey, Ebrahimoff, how is it possible that we go on Rosh Hashanah in September, in Tishrei? What's that about? So I'll explain it to you. Originally, when we went into the Babylonian exile, we used to keep the beginning of the new year counting off in Chodesh HaRishon, in Nisan. While we were in the Babylonian exile, you could take America, for example. When you say New Year's, people jump to December 31st and January 1st. Well, guess what? The months went from Chodesh HaRishon and Chodesh HaShvi'i, which was the 7th month, which was originally Yom Teruah. Doesn't say Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. It just says the day that they blew the shofar. And what happened is, while in the Babylonian exile, we adapted and then adopted the custom of having the beginning of the year in the 7th month. We come back to Israel after the 70-year exile, and what do? They throw a New Year's party. When's the party? In Tishrei. But I don't mean party like in America. I mean it becomes a celebration and a dedication and a very, very solemn time that we have preceding the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. That's the minhag that spun into customs that we keep today. But the biblical origins were that we had Rosh Hashanah on Nisan, and that eventually it's now observed on Tishrei. There are two other New Years. Does anybody know the other ones? Yes, very good. Tu B'Shvat is the New Year for the plants. And guess what? It's the 15th of the month. So while we're talking about Rosh Chodesh, let's talk about the 15th of the month. Rosh Chodesh is when you look up in the sky and you just see the beginning of a sliver of the new moon. But when do you have a full moon? On the 15th of the month. Okay, do we have calendars 3,000 years ago? No. What do we use? The moon. How important is the moon? They hang on to it. Watch. Sukkot, what day of the month? 15th. Sukkot. 15th. Tu B'Shvat, Pesach, Tu B'Av. They have 5 holidays that start on the 15th of the month. Why? Because they would look up and they would see full moon, that they were in sync with their counting of the beginning of the holidays. So the third New Year is the New Year for agricultural taxes. What do you mean? Well, originally, I don't know if you know this, in the United States, Income Tax Day wasn't on April 15th. It was on March 15th. Very, very close to the income tax that you paid on Tu B'Shvat. It may have a biblical and historical origin. Why the 15th is the tax day? It may have its origins in the Jewish calendar that you paid your taxes on Tu B'Shvat, the agricultural taxes on the 15th of the month. Next, there's another Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah la Behemot, for the animals. What month? Elul, right before our current Rosh Hashanah. And what is it for, the Behemot? What? It was a animal tax. It was a tax on the increase that you had. Remember, we were not in a technological society. We were in an agricultural society. We were farmers and we were shepherds. So whatever bounty you got in your crops, you pay your taxes on that, and I'll explain later a little more. And then also on your animals. If in 2012, to pick a year, you had 1,000 cows, and then 2013 you come in with, what'd I say, 1,000? 2,000. And you went to 3,000, you had an increase of 1,000, you paid your taxes of 10% on the increase. And when was it? On that Rosh Hashanah that you paid. So there's 4 Rosh Hashanahs that the Jewish people have: the original New Year, the current New Year, and then the agricultural and the animal taxes. Remember, we started by Chodesh HaRishon, first month. It changed to Nisan in the Babylonian exile. What else did we pick up in the Babylonian exile? I'll tell you, base 12. The number 12, we started to count with it. So not only the months, you already had the 12 tribes, the Shvatim, the 12 states, 12 months, 12 inches, 12 signs in the astrological sign. And I'll tell you something you never heard anywhere else. The English number counting system, the words, the names for the numbers are base 12. In other words, not the decimal system, but it changed after 12. Let's do it in Hebrew. We'll start Shmone, Teisha, Eser, and then you go Echad Esrei, 1, 10, Shteim Esrei, 2, 10. Watch what happens in English. You go 8, 9, 10, 11, unique word, 12, unique word, then 13, 14, 15. So the names of the English numbers are base 12. There's 12 unique names for numbers in the English language sourced from the Babylonian times. Now let's go to the English calendar for a minute. English calendar, you have 12 months, right? Didn't start that way. Why? September is 7, October 8, November 9, December, decimal, 10. Wait a minute. Everybody knows December is the 12th month. What happened? 2 guys, Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar, July and August. We are God's chosen supreme rulers, and we're going to name a month after ourselves to commemorate ourselves, and we'll be celebrated our existence for eternity. So here you have little things in the calendar and their origins. Even a simple thing, like when someone says, just a second. What is that in Hebrew? Shniyah. Not Rishon, but Shniyah. Second. Seconds in English, not firsts, but seconds. So you have these parallels, for just interesting, no deep meaning, just interesting things about the calendar and counting. So that is Rosh Hashanah. Then if you turn to the next page, you'll see Tzom Gedaliahu. Now, I'm going to concentrate on the 4 fast days. In 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. But what happened before then? A year and a half earlier, on the 10th of Tevet, he surrounded the city of Jerusalem. He was not going to kill everybody. He didn't bring enough soldiers. He didn't bring enough food for the soldiers. So what he did is he brought enough men to surround the city of Jerusalem. Okay, then what happens? You starve the Jews inside the city of Jerusalem. There's pestilence and disease when these people die and they're dead. You have disease also in a walled city. So more people die from that. Then he was counting on people fighting amongst themselves and killing off each other. Why? Some people said, surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. Some people said, we have to fight against Nebuchadnezzar. Those people killed some of each other off. It was nasty. But when Nebuchadnezzar got to the city walls on Shivasar B'Tammuz, 18 months after the beginning of the siege, the second of the 4 fast days, most of the people were already dead. They didn't have a lot more to kill off. And then, as we all know, Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, but also the 9/11, Av is the 11th month, the 9th of Av is the spiritual 9/11 of the Jewish people. Why? Today, you don't like this shul, you go down the block to the next shul. In those days, one shul, nowhere else. You're going anywhere, you're going to the Beit HaMikdash. That was it. There was only one place to worship God, and that was the Beit HaMikdash. So what did Nebuchadnezzar know? He knew that as long as the Jewish people had a holy temple, you weren't going to get these people away from Israel. And what did he want? If you look at him in the book of Melachim and Yirmiyahu, he looks like a Hitler. He looks like a guy that wanted to kill all the Jews. Wait a minute. What happens is, look in the book of Daniel. What does he do with the Jews that he exiled? He takes Daniel. Daniel proves himself that he could explain the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar. And like Yosef became second in command of Mitzrayim, Daniel becomes second in command of Babylonia. As a matter of fact, it continues because Mordechai became second in command of Persia. Not bad for a little nation of Jewish people. So, now Nebuchadnezzar knocks down the Beit HaMikdash, exiles the Jewish people, and there they lived. But he lifted them up. There was infighting amongst his people that were jealous of us, but Nebuchadnezzar knew one thing about the Jewish people. He knew we had wisdom, we had connectivity. We were able to be the wise men in his royal administration. And that's where he put Daniel. That's what he wanted, the wisdom of the Jews. And the only way he could get it is by dislodging the Beit HaMikdash off of planet Earth. So what is this man here at Tzom Gedalia? It's right after Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because it may have happened on Rosh Hashanah when they murdered this man. Who murdered him? We murdered him, our own people. Why? It was in collaboration with the Ammonites. Why? Nebuchadnezzar, if you could picture this, came from Babylonia, up here. He couldn't come through the desert. He had to come over the top from the north, down through Israel. Then he made a left turn to go into Yerushalayim. Along his way, he destroyed a lot of cities. So now what happens? Baalis, the king of the Ammonites, said, what's stopping Nebuchadnezzar from plowing through my country, where Amman Jordan is? What's stopping him? So we better put something in place that'll be the end of the power of the Jewish people. Gedaliah was put in place by Nebuchadnezzar as the governor of Jerusalem. And the people that used to be in the royal administration said, hey, wait a minute. Is he from Malchus David? If he's from the Davidic dynasty, okay, then he should be in charge. But he wasn't. So the people that were on the king's team and also the people from Ammon collaborated together, and a man named Yishmael, it's written in the Tanakh, all these stories, had him murdered and killed him. What's the big deal? He was the last ray of hope for the Jewish people to be saved and to regain their footing in the city of Jerusalem. Therefore, we have a fast day, but it's only one fast day from an 18-month cycle, of which we have 4 fast days in the years attributed to Nebuchadnezzar. There is no man on the Jewish calendar that has more days attributed to him than Nebuchadnezzar. Then you could see on the next page, Yom Kippur was a biblical holiday that we were given in the Torah. Let's turn over the page to Sukkot. So I want to talk about Sukkot. Sukkot is part of what we know as the Shalosh Regalim. But let's think about it for a minute. There's other names to these holidays. Pesach has another name, Chag HaAviv. Shavuot has another name, Chag HaKatzir, the holiday of the cutting of the wheat and the crops. And then finally, Sukkot also has another name, Chag HaAsif, the holiday of the gathering. Okay, so what's going on here? It's not one holiday going on, there's 2. It's not Chag Sameach, it's Chagim Smechim. I'll explain. One is the commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. Passover, Pesach, is from the Paschal Lamb. We're remembering how we slaughtered the lamb and that we went out of the land of Egypt. Then you get Shavuot. They gave the Torah at Mount Sinai and received the Torah, and we commemorate the giving of the Torah on Shavuot. Then Sukkot. We have the Sukkah that we remember living in a Sukkah for 40 years in the desert. That's one grouping of holidays. Guess what? There's another grouping, the Shalosh Regalim, the pilgrimage holidays. Remember, those holidays took place, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot took place from the time we left Egypt and while we were in the desert. That's where they started. But there's another grouping of holidays. It's called the agricultural holidays. Chag HaAviv, that is the beginning of the summer. That is the planting season. Then Chag HaKatzir, that's Shavuot, that's the harvesting season. And then Chag HaAsif. What happened? While in Israel, when there was either the Mishkan, the tabernacle, or the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple, Jewish people, husband, wife, just the husband, children, not children, about 100, 150,000 people would make Aliyah L'Regel. They would go up to Jerusalem. Some people took a month. Most people took weeks to get there. And there they camped out in the city of Jerusalem, and there they celebrated these holidays. They are 2 separate, distinct holidays that are celebrated simultaneously. That when you tell people this, they have to kind of think for a minute. Hey, wait a minute. I never thought of it that way, but it makes a lot of sense. One is that we remember what happened to us in Egypt and the desert. The other grouping is the agricultural holidays, that while we were living in Israel and we had blessed crops and we had blessings, we were commanded to go up to Jerusalem and offer up these offerings to God in the Beit HaMikdash. So that's the little piece on Sukkot and the other holidays. During Sukkot, if you look at the next page, you have this wonderful chag called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, and all of us have learned about it, that if you haven't seen Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which was a celebration, they would retrieve water from the Shiloach pool, and they would come, the Kohanim would come in these big jugs of water, and they would pour it on the corner of the Mizbeach, and that it says that they would light torches with the threads of the old Kohen's clothing, and it would light up the city like a torch, and that the Kohanim could do handstands on their thumbs. There was music, there was dancing, it went all night long. It was a tremendous celebration. About what? Water. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, you know all about Chizkiyahu's tunnel. Water was the essential ingredient to our existence. No water, you can't plant the crops, you can't eat. So we celebrated the fact that we were blessed with tremendous abundance of water in our lives. And that was a holiday that went on during Chol HaMoed Sukkot. Now, the next page, if you look at Kislev, I skipped ahead, and now we're celebrating Chanukah. And at Chanukah, we say that there's a miracle of oil. You also look into the book of Maccabees and Josephus. And guess what it says over there? It says that on the 25th of Kislev, that because the Maccabees took back the Temple Mount, and who did they fight? It's never popularized. It was a civil war. Just like today, 90% of Jewish people are not observant, and 10% are. Well, in those days, when the Greek Empire took over the region, they were selling their lifestyle. And you want to know something? Most of us went for it. Dionysus, physical beauty, gymnasium, the Greek lifestyle. Even they went as far as slaughtering pigs on the temple altar. There's one family we all know that wouldn't put up with it. And it was Maccabee, Yehuda HaMaccabee, and that these were the Hashmonaim. At first, they stood up to their own people and said, hey, what are you doing? And then they took on the Greeks. And if you look in the book of the Apocrypha, the book of Maccabees, it says on the 25th of Kislev that they carried lulav and esrog for 8 days on the Temple Mount. I'm not making it up. It's in there. Why? Because they said 3 months earlier, we didn't have the Beit HaMikdash. 3 months earlier, we couldn't observe Sukkot over here. So now we took it back. It's ours again, and we're going to celebrate for 8 days, similar to the duration of Sukkot. I'm not saying that the miracle of oil didn't happen. It did. But what I am saying is there's also origins to the duration of the 8 days that you have a different explanation, not one that knocks it out. I'll continue. That now, and if you flip to the next page, you see Asara B'Tevei. Now, next 10 days after Chanukah, you're going to have Asara B'Tevei. Then you're going to think to yourself, hey, I attended a class, and in the class I learned that the 4 fast days that we have that are not Purim and not Yom Kippur are the 4 fast days that were put in place because of Nebuchadnezzar in an 18-month cycle from the year 588, roughly 2,500 years ago, until 586 BCE when the temple was destroyed. So now we understand. This is the beginning of the siege. Remember, he surrounded us, he starved us, he murdered us, he exiled us, he destroyed the temple, and he took us to Babylon. He was a very, very terrible man to the Jewish people, and this fast day commemorates it. Okay, to jump quickly, Tu B'Shvat. Remember, I said Tu B'Shvat was one of the 4 Rosh Hashanahs. Do you see this little glass jar on the Shvat page over here? You got this page? On the Shvat page. This is a glass jar, Sidonian, Greek period. It is in the shape of a date. If you look at it, it's in the shape of a date. There's a man in London and in Herzliya. His name is Shlomo Musayev. Shlomo Musayev is the world's largest collector of biblical antiquities. And this glass jar, with 6 other jars in the shapes of Chita, Seorah, Gefen, Te'ena, Rimon, Zeitim, is in the shape of wheat, pomegranate, dates, you name it, the 7 different species. What did he say? It's not written anywhere. Could be a story, could be true. He said that the people that would make Aliyah L'Regel, the pilgrims, when they would go up to the Beit HaMikdash from their towns that they lived in, they would take these jars, they had a special belt, and in each jar they put the seeds of the corresponding fruits. So the date had fruits, the seeds of dates, the pomegranate had seeds of pomegranates, and on throughout the 7 different species. When they would go to the Beit HaMikdash, they would go to the Kohen, and they would say to the priest, bless me, bless these seeds. So when I go back home and I plant the seeds, I'll have blessed crops in abundance, and I'll show up next year with my taxes for you again. So this is just a little story about life in biblical times, and that's what this jar represents to me, that the Jewish people understood that God was the source of the blessing, and that God's emissaries and God's liaisons were the Kohanim that gave blessings in those days. So that's a little piece on the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, one of the 4 New Years. Then, Purim. While we're in the Persian Empire, we have the story of Purim, and we're all very, very familiar with the story of Purim. And this is the one holiday that while we were under the Persian Empire, that this holiday took place. So what I'm trying to run through here is when we were in Egypt, we got Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. We're in the land of Israel, we have a grouping of holidays. When the Babylonians took us over, we had the 4 fast days. Now the Persians take over, and it's the holiday of Purim. And we all know the story of Achashverosh. It's very, very interesting. From these evil men, Achashverosh, Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, and also Antiochus Epiphanes. These 4 evil men did good things come to the Jewish people after they tried to impose their tremendous evilness upon us, but we were resilient. And that God's people, it didn't matter about how strong our armies were, it mattered how connected we were to God and our faith and emunah and belief. So while we were there, we were fortunate enough to be sent back to the land of Israel by Cyrus, Koresh. Then if you turn to the next page, we're up to the month of Nisan. And that, you heard me explain, that one is commemorating the Exodus, Pesach, that's the page you got it. And on the other side of it was one of the pilgrimage holidays, Chag HaAviv, when they would go up to the temple. What you have over here is a stamp. It's a matzah stamp that they would push into the dough before they baked it. And it says, upside down on the top, but I flipped over the digital image so you could read it, Le Pesach, in the Hebrew script of the time that it came. Why? So you walk through the streets, or you went to the bakery, you just had to look at the matzah to see that it was kosher lePesach matzah, that they stamped into the matzah the word lePesach, kosher for Passover in those days. So that's what I included about Pesach. Now, I mentioned the next page is Tammuz. Shiva Asar b'Tammuz. Now we all know, I know, it's one of the 4 fast days, it's because of Nebuchadnezzar, but look over there, and what do you see? A coin. Now whose face is on the coin? Antiochus Epiphanes. This is Antiochus, the 4th, and the Epiphanes is, I'm selected by God to be the ruler over the world. This is what he believed. And he wanted to impose everything that he believed, the whole Greek way of life, on everybody, including the Jews. And I mentioned that most of us went for it. But why do we have Haftorahs? Because of him. Because what did he say? 3 things. No Rosh Chodesh. Can't celebrate Rosh Chodesh. You don't know what time a month starts, what day of the month starts. How can you keep any of the holidays? You don't know what day of the month it is. No Brit Milah, no circumcision. In other words, you're not physically a Jewish person. And then he said you cannot learn Torah. So what are you talking about? Says the glue, the devek to the Jewish people is learning Torah. If they sit there and they put their heads together, right? Like why do we sit and learn bechavruta? We're learning. So he said if they don't have the Torah, they can't stick together learning. They're going to diffuse. There's 2 ways to control the situation. One is with a strong fist. The other way, you take a drop of oil and you drop it onto water, it diffuses. So his methodology was to diffuse the Jewish people, to get them to separate out of the religion and become Greeks in behavior. So the Haftorahs got started. As you all know, my nickname is Haftorah Man. I speak about the Haftorahs. Why did the Haftorahs get started? Is because he said there's no Torah learning. So one of the explanations is that they said, he never said anything about Nevi'im, the prophets, and therefore they picked Haftorahs that had similar themes to the Parsha that was being read at the time, most of the time. That's the main story that most people are told and believe. The word Haftarah actually means supplemental reading. So if you ask me, I don't know. But another theory could be that they read from the Torah and they said, you know something? Things never change. As a matter of fact, Avram and Sarah didn't have children. Okay, Elkanah and Hannah. What's Hannah's husband's name? Elkanah? Okay, so they didn't have children. Okay, so things never change over time. That's how the Haftarot got started. So here you have a great, great understanding of how things got started. The next page is Tisha B'Av, and then we all know about that. Destruction of the Holy Temple, that it stayed down for many, many years, and that after 70 years we came back to the city of Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, and there it stood again for another 420 years. Finally, as I explained before about the 4 Rosh Hashanahs, that there's a 4th Rosh Hashanah in the month of Elul. So here you go. Inside an hour, you're able to look at a timeline and see the beginnings of every Jewish holiday. Where were we as a nation when the first time it was celebrated? What brought it upon us, this holiday? Who was the ruler of the other superpower? Because we were always the subculture within a superpower, whether Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, whatever. And that now you also see the beginnings of every holiday. By the way, Purim, the first year, it wasn't celebrated by everybody throughout the world. It took time for it to catch on. First in Shushan, and then it expanded out into different days until there was a set day. And then you could see the change over time, that it became solidified, that it's celebrated throughout the world, except in Yerushalayim, Shushan Purim, but how holidays evolved over time. So here you have it. I hope you take this home, these handouts, and that you could look at the timeline and the map when a holiday is coming up, and you can understand when did it get started and where were we when it got started. I hope you enjoyed the class. Thank you very much.